What's going on, people? I am Dukedobbins, FTW. And 5 months after its release, almost everyone agrees Destiny 2 has been a train wreck. Its player populations have plummeted, its YouTubers are abandoning it, its most die-hard fans have turned on it, and stock analysts are skeptical the franchise will even survive going forward. These negative reactions are being driven by two depressingly familiar issues. One, the game has a glaring lack of content, and what it does have is widely considered tedious and dull. Two, Bungie is desperately trying to boost revenue by oversaturating the Destiny experience with paywalls and rigged game mechanics that make even their most loyal fans feel disrespected and cheated. Without a doubt, Bungie still has plenty of DLC to sell people. Along with Eververse microtransactions and all the miscellaneous Pop-Tart, Mountain Dew pre-order bonus toys, it's easy to imagine this game milking people for another $100 or more, which is troubling when so many players already feel ripped off and let down. So today, I wanted to take an in-depth look at what's causing these problems, and more importantly, why all evidence to date would suggest that things aren't going to get better with future DLC. Which is something every Destiny player needs to come to terms with before they spend another dime on this franchise. It's funny, researching this topic, I've had the most surreal sense of deja vu, almost as if this has all happened before. Many journalists and players feel the same way, because the problems we're seeing with Destiny 2 today are the same problems we had with Destiny 1 years ago. A hollow base game, mediocre DLC, poorly implemented events, aggravating pay schemes, an outraged community, and an unresponsive Bungie. I could be describing the state of things now or the state of Destiny in 2015, and this isn't a coincidence. Destiny 2 has the same problems as Destiny 1 because it made the same mistakes. We now know that Destiny 2 was rebooted 16 months before its release because, you know, it worked out so great the first time around. To put things in perspective, Destiny 2 had less development time than a typical Call of Duty game. Before, COD had 3 separate devs. Now, I don't know if any longtime Bat subs remember, but I had a feeling this might happen back when Harold Ryan, the Bungie CEO, resigned out of nowhere in the middle of this huge project. This information is all brought to us by Jason Schreier, the same guy who correctly predicted that Destiny 2 would come to PC and also revealed the theme, title, and several key plot points of the Osiris DLC well before its release. He's a published author whose book goes into even greater detail about the trials Bungie faced with D2 and is widely respected in the industry. So far, none of his Destiny reporting has been publicly refuted, so there's little reason to doubt the accuracy of what he reports in these articles. Speaking on the Destiny Tracker podcast, Schreier says about Destiny 2, and I quote, "I think that it was made in a relatively short period of time. There was a big reboot of Destiny 2 at some point in early 2016. There had been a previous guy who was directing the game before Luke Smith, the current director, took over. So that guy was kind of put aside. He's not at Bungie anymore. So if you think about it that way, they didn't really have a ton of time to work on this game. It had been a 16-month period between the reboot and when the game actually shipped." So we don't know why Destiny 2 got rebooted. At the time, Destiny 1 had been going very poorly, but The Taken King was considered a huge success. Putting in the TTK's director, Luke Smith, may have seemed a logical choice. Still, the decision had its consequences. Schreier goes on to mention that some planned mechanics and content had to be cut from Destiny 2, such as removing the old D1 planetary locations. RIP. You may recall Schreier also published that incredibly detailed behind-the-scenes look at what went wrong with Destiny 1, an article which Bungie never denied and which some of you may remember I made a video about. It told a story of a dysfunctional Bungie, mired in chaos and technical shortcomings. Anonymous sources claimed the tech for their new engine was fucked, that it took their computers 8 hours at a time to load any given map for editing, so in order to make even the smallest changes to content, they would have to load the map overnight and do it the next day, slowing their development progress to a trickle. This is why Destiny 1, some D1 DLC, and Destiny 2 all had to see delayed release dates. Eventually, realizing they couldn't keep up with the punishing schedule of 2 DLCs a year, Bungie sought to renegotiate their contract with Activision, seeking to hit revenue targets using microtransactions in the form of Eververse instead of traditional content releases. Activision agreed to the renegotiated contract. So it's important to note microtransactions, the cut content, the rebooting were all Bungie's idea, not some nefarious plot they were forced into by a greedy publisher trying to hamstring a game it had already invested $500 million in. There's a more explosive claim in that article that rarely gets any attention and again has yet to be denied. Discussing the Taken King release, Schreier writes, "The team ultimately decided to focus on a single major map, the Hive ship that had been cut from vanilla Destiny, as well as a new public space on Mars, complete with strikes and a new raid. That entire last Mars chunk was later cut and passed to Activision's subsidiary High Moon Studios to develop for Destiny's full-size sequel," a source said. Obviously, we know Mars content didn't make it into Destiny 2. Is it too much of a stretch to imagine that the next DLC, Gods of Mars, is in fact that 5-year-old vanilla Destiny 1 content mentioned in the article? Curse of Osiris could be cut from D1 as well. That article talks about a large section of Mercury content that was cut from base game D1. It said, and I quote, "The story would have also starred a character familiar to hardcore Destiny fans, Osiris, described by one source as an Obi-Wan Kenobi-like mentor living in an ancient Vex temple on Mercury." The article goes on to say that Destiny 1 originally had 30 to 45 second cutscenes of the NPC setting up the mission context. Osiris announcing a dramatic discovery about the Vex and asking you to dig up an ancient relic on Mars. So we know there was a bunch of Osiris Mercury content cut from D1 Vanilla that we never saw. Does anyone really think that this time-crunched company delaying its releases and desperately trying to hit deadlines with glacially slow tech would just throw out completed content? Doesn't it seem more likely that Curse of Osiris is just some retweaked D1 content? And remember, if in the next DLC, Gods of Mars, Osiris asks you to dig up an ancient relic on Mars, that shit was predicted like 3 years ago in this guy's article. It's also worth pointing out the symbol on the Gods of Mars DLC banner is that of a war mind. This article specifically mentions that Charlemagne, a war mind on Mars, was cut from Destiny 1. When you consider that we also saw gameplay footage of the EDZ back in Destiny 1 E3 trailer 6 years ago, you have to wonder just how much of Destiny 2 is chopped up pieces of Destiny 1. We know that right after Destiny 1 released and work had already begun on D2, Bungie saw rapid turnover in many important positions. They lost their head writer, their head composer, senior gameplay designer Josh Hamrick left in 2015, their CEO Harold Ryan took off. Any employer will tell you high turnover is bad for business. It leaves projects in limbo while you're trying to fill the new slot. It takes the new employee extra time to get acclimated and caught up to speed on the project. It means delays in progress. And the one thing everyone knows about video games is that even in fully staffed, well-oiled development teams, getting games done on time is hard. There's huge ongoing controversies about devs being overworked, crunch times, games that get released broken as hell, games that get delayed several times over. This isn't an industry where developers can get away with that kind of internal chaos unscathed. It would appear they're still using that same shitty tech that bottlenecks their development. That original article stated pretty clearly that the content issues were related to this brand new engine they had built from scratch specifically for Destiny, and as far as we can tell, they're still on that same engine. If they can shoehorn in random pieces of cut content like the EZ and Mars, it would have to be on the same engine. So they're still dealing with that obstacle, and so what I suspect is that to compensate for this turnover turmoil and this frustrating tech, they're relying on cut content. But the problem with cut content is that it can make for a shit game. To meet deadlines, they shave off content from one release, save it for the next one, but it means giving the player base the bare minimum of content to count as a release. But at least it's a release. On top of this, when you're developing a game with the mindset of, oh, we need to have an excuse to do something on Mercury now so we can use that content, it's going to be hard to craft an overarching master narrative, you know? Curse of Osiris was roundly criticized for just not having that compelling of a storyline. Because how could it? It's like if you were watching Star Wars Episode 4 and there's this random scene from Episode 1 in there. It's like if while they're in Mos Eisley, Luke and Ben Kenobi stop to watch a pod race for no apparent reason, and then they randomly show you the whole pod race scene from Phantom Menace. Even if they CGI Luke and Ben in the stands and trick you into not realizing it's cut, the scene from Episode 1 isn't going to have any real connection to the rest of the story. It's going to seem random and out of place and unrelated to the larger plot taking place. The pod race story won't have as much depth or significance to it when you don't know that Anakin is Darth Vader and his whole future is on the line, and if he loses, he'll be a slave forever. It's just a random pod race they threw in because the movie had to have a runtime over 90 minutes. Part of what made the Halo story so magnificent was the buildup, the suspense, and the big-ass moments. When you discover the Flood for the first time, when you find out Halo is a weapon that kills everyone, not just the Flood, when the Covenant find out the prophets have been lying about the Great Journey, when you find out the humans were Forerunner, it makes you go like, whoa, this changes everything. I have to rethink my whole understanding of the story up to this point. But they can't develop these kind of narratives when they're swinging from tree to tree like fucking Tarzan. Notice how none of the DLC is ever really connected to the main game's plot except tangentially, in the sense that it's taking place in the same universe. Every DLC is, oh, now the Vex are doing something to screw everyone over, we have to stop them. Now the Cabal are trying to screw us over, we have to stop them too. In the next DLC, the Vandals are going to try and screw people over in a whole new and unrelated storyline. Every DLC, it's new bad guys, new problems. It's like episodes of Cops that you'd watch drunk for half an hour before you go to bed after a long day at work, not some timeless epic that's going to be remembered with Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. The problem with cut content is that you end up with a shallow game. Destiny 2 has been mostly criticized for the same reasons as Destiny 1. There wasn't that much content or replay value, because just like last time, they didn't have enough time to get very much done. Even Dado Does Destiny has said, and I quote, "There isn't enough to this game to cover it the way I do." The DLC so far has seen 5 out of 10 and 6 out of 10 scores that specifically highlight its shit story and lack of content. Only 6 weeks after Destiny 2 had come out, it had already lost 78% of its player base. For perspective, as a clever Redditor pointed out, it takes a typical Call of Duty game 6 months to see that same decline in daily player populations. After people started pointing this out, Destiny Tracker, the website that tracks those player counts, took the shit down because it thought people were trying to spread a false narrative. But the thing is, numbers aren't narrative. They are measurable and comparable. What's the true narrative? Destiny isn't supposed to have as much replay value as COD? Give me a fucking break. Is this supposed to just be some free-to-play game in the App Store on Facebook for $60? Is that a fucking joke? This is the perfect example of everything wrong with Destiny. All these fucking bandwagoners who hitch their shit to Destiny, trying desperately to prop up the game's hype so that their shit stays relevant and they can keep writing coattails, and in the meantime, unsuspecting players fall for the hype and throw away their cash on trash they'll get bored of in a week or two. And you can bet your ass when player populations bottom out like that, it hurts their profits. It's gonna hurt their units sold. More importantly, it's gonna deal a serious blow to DLC and microtransaction sales. And I'd speculate this is why we keep seeing all these frustrating little ploys to squeeze the fans still playing for every penny they have, because they're desperate to make up lost revenue. Already, Destiny 2 has been embroiled in several scandals that saw monumental backlash, often from even its most loyal fans. To briefly recap, they ran a double XP event but capped the amount of glimmer you could obtain and didn't tell anyone. They made the seasonal loot boxes unearnable through play. You can only buy them during the event. And worst of all, when they release DLC, they're locking the endgame content for people who don't buy it, which is all the more offensive considering how little replay value the game has to begin with. Each of these little schemes is going to push their short-term DLC and microtransaction sales a little higher, even if it means damaging their brand long-term. But keep in mind, many players aren't keeping up to date with Reddit outrage and probably don't even bat an eye. But there's a reason most other games don't try and pull obnoxious crap like this, because long-term it does poison your relationship with your customers. But what I suspect is that Bungie feels they don't have a choice. Keep in mind, as that article mentioned, the whole reason they came up with Eververse was to make up for the money they wouldn't get from DLCs. And remember, they had to get their contract renegotiated to do it. Activision had to agree to that. But there's a universe in which they didn't. And what would happen then if they couldn't raise revenue off of Eververse and they still failed to meet their DLC deadline? Well, they'd probably breach the contract. The basic premise of these contracts between publishers and devs is, hey, Activision will give you a bunch of money, but then you have to produce a product. The contract usually outlines parameters for when the product has to be finished and of what quality it has to be. You can't just take Activision's $500 million and then go whip up some shit on RuneScape Java. But if the developer fails to perform, if it fails to get the stuff out on time, or if the stuff is obviously not of the quality set out in the contract, they breach the contract and Activision is entitled to damages, or it may activate other penalties laid out in said contract. Maybe Activision gets a higher percentage share of the revenue if revenue falls below a certain point. You may recall the leaked bit of contract we saw during Destiny 1 laid out extra bonuses Bungie would receive if they got a 90 on Metacritic. I wonder what the opposite end of that looks like. Is there a penalty if Destiny 3 only gets a 10 on Metacritic? And so this is super speculative, but this is what I feel like is happening. Bungie's desperate. They know all this nickel and dime is going to piss people off, but they won't stop doing it because they're just barely meeting their contractually obligated deadlines. In a contract they've already had to renegotiate to allow 2 delayed releases and a complete rework of the DLC model to include microtransactions. Will Activision agree to further renegotiations? I doubt it, and why should they? Bungie's trying to pass on the cost of their incompetence to the user, but you don't owe them anything. Each time people get angry about whatever scam was being run that day, Bungie comes out and says sorry, they won't do it again. But they're not going to stop. Some of the stuff people were just as outraged about during Destiny 1, like paywalling off the endgame content with DLC. But Bungie's still doing it, and why would they stop? It's not like these people complaining on Reddit stopped buying the shit. But more importantly, Destiny 2 is obviously still suffering from the same problems as before. Bottlenecked equipment, staff turnover, game development reboots. They're going to have to compensate with the same shit, cut content, and cheap pay tricks. This is a pattern that has been going on since the release of Destiny 1, and you might say now, well, they're definitely going to have had time to get their shit together this time, but isn't that what we said before Destiny 2? Just like last time, they've already announced that they've begun work on Destiny 3, so while Destiny 2 is in flames, they're spread thin building a whole new game, and I doubt they've magically had time to build a new engine, so they'll still be stuck with that tech that takes 8 hours overnight to load one map for editing. If you have been unhappy with Destiny so far, you can't be surprised if you're unhappy after spending more money on it in the future. One of the things that's been so frustrating seeing how outraged the Destiny community is and how let down all its shill YouTubers are is that they are generally complaining about the same things they would get mad at me for complaining about.
But the game is just, I don't play the Nightfalls. I can't stand the raid. I think the raid is awful. Putting a timer on the Nightfalls is one of the worst things they've ever done. The strikes are boring. Just everything's boring. And the Dukedobbins and Angry Joe, you guys were right. I thought you guys were just haters in the beginning. Like when I first saw those hate videos about Destiny 2 that Dukedobbins uploaded and Angry Joe, because they both shit all over the game. And I was triggered because I was such a Destiny fanboy. But after playing that game for a month, you guys were right. You guys nailed it. Destiny 2, man. Only DLC will save that game.
I said this game had a lack of content and low replay value 2 weeks after it was out, and that video got like 20,000 dislikes, thousands more than its likes at the time. Datto comes out and basically says the same thing 6 months later after everyone's already bought it, and it's like, oh yeah, that Datto is a straight talker, this game sucks. Like, motherfucker, don't bash your head into a wall, get mad at me when I tell you to stop, and then complain later about having a headache. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 7 or 8 times in a row, and I must be a Destiny fan. Thanks for watching. Please remember to rate, and everyone be sure to go follow me on Twitch. I've been doing a lot of streaming recently, some Battlefield, some Fortnite. Make sure you go follow me on Twitch, link in the description. This is Batman signing out.
Fucking, yeah, we get it. We fucking get it. Randoms coming in here and saying that the game's shit and whatever. We fucking get it. We've had this conversation for 4 fucking months already. Give it up. Do something else with your time. Put that energy that you have into coming into Destiny streams and fucking just saying the same shit over and over and do something with that. I don't know. Go fucking cure cancer or some shit. Go put that energy. Learn an instrument. Learn a new fucking language. Can't believe Dow doesn't stream Destiny anymore. Can't fucking believe it. Why wouldn't he stream Destiny anymore? That's fucking why. Learn how to play a sport. Go play Dance Dance Revolution. Fucking run. Exercise. Eat healthy. Drink a glass of water.